My name is William. I'm a salesman at a company that's deeply rooted in the local community. I'll be turning 28 this year, but I didn't grow up here. Right after high school, I left my hometown and headed straight to this city. I'm incredibly grateful to my boss for hiring a high school graduate like me and helping me grow into the person I am today. Back in the day, I had quite the reputation as a troublemaker in my hometown. I was a wild child, into motorcycles, and pretty good in a fight because I hated losing. My antics caused plenty of headaches for my parents and teachers. But now I'm reformed and a respectable member of society. I don't visit my hometown often, but when I do reach out, I can tell my parents are relieved. I've even started sending them a little money now and then. One day, after returning from a client's place, I got a call from my boss. He had been waiting for me. When I arrived at his office, the white-haired man greeted me with a smile. I apologized for keeping him waiting, but he waved it off. This boss of mine is a good guy, well known in town for his community involvement. He took me under his wing like I was his own son. He motioned for me to sit on the guest sofa and then said, "Sorry for the suddenness, but Robert, what do you think about matchmaking?" I was caught off guard. My social life lacks a feminine touch, but it's not like I can't attract women. I just haven't felt like dating because I'm still getting my life back on track. But this wasn't just about dating, it was about marriage. And coming from my boss, my benefactor, I felt anxious. He continued, "She's the daughter of the owner of Harris Enterprises. You've seen her at Chamber of Commerce parties, right?" I had seen her before. She was well known, not for her looks, but for never smiling. People called her a cool beauty, but she had zero sociability. Her beautiful eyes and well-proportioned face stood out even at those parties. The boss said the president of Harris Enterprises wanted to introduce her to a good young man, and my face came to mind. He handed me her marriage interview photo with a smile. The girl in the photo was definitely pretty but seemed unsociable. I have my own ideals. A cute, homely girl who eats well. This girl looked like she might be eating mist or something. I tried to decline politely, but the boss wasn't having it. "Are you saying my eyes are clouded? There's no one more suitable than you," he insisted. In the end, I agreed to the marriage interview, feeling a pit in my stomach. The date was set, and the boss even gave me money for a new suit. I reluctantly bought one, not wanting to ruin his reputation. On the day of the interview, I entered a high-class restaurant in my brand new suit, feeling a sharp pain in my stomach. I hadn't told my parents about the marriage interview because I planned to decline. Somehow, the boss was sitting with me as a substitute for my parents. After a while of sitting, the landlady of the restaurant showed up, and with the announcement, "Your party has arrived," the face of Harris Enterprises' boss appeared. Behind the president, his daughter in a formal dress followed. Seeing her up close, she had skin like porcelain and a beauty that was somehow out of this world. I was taken aback. "Sorry to keep you waiting. This is my daughter. Her name is Nora." President Harris introduced her. She slightly retracted her chin and nodded to me. Of course, there was no smile on her face. Rather, I was startled by the sharpness of her gaze when she quietly looked at me. In the end, the marriage interview was just the bosses talking while we focused on eating. It was a very uncomfortable space. The meal was finally over with the dessert, and the two bosses left the table together, saying, "Now it's up to the young people." It's a common sight at marriage interviews. As soon as the two of them left, the girl who had been silent until now opened her mouth. "Do you want to get married?" Her sudden aggressiveness made me momentarily angry. Ugh, who talks like that? Always take the fight if it's offered to you. That's how I've lived thus far. If someone was spoiling for a fight, I wouldn't back down either. Her icy gaze stabbed at me, clearly pissed off at my attitude. The marriage interview was your parents' idea, wasn't it? You could have put it more tactfully. You have been staying silent throughout the meeting. Are you trying to embarrass my boss? Think about it. Once I start talking, it's hard to stop. I expressed my distaste for her attitude. Acting high and mighty, who do you think you are living a life that gives you the right to lecture others? We both seemed to have confrontational personalities. After a huge argument that caused the landlady to intervene, the marriage interview ended. I figured she would be the one to reject me. Even so, she was a strong-willed president's daughter. I went back to my apartment and thought about her. I was mad, but there was a part of me that couldn't hate her, leaving me feeling unsettled. Days passed since the marriage interview, and I hadn't received any rejection. Instead, I was called into the boss's office during my lunch break to be told that there was a date invitation from her. I was genuinely shocked and taken aback. After such a huge fight, her not rejecting me was surprising. It could be some kind of prank. I left the boss's office feeling like I'd been had. In my hand was a note with the date and time of the next meeting. I needed a drink to deal with this. As soon as I got back to the office, I asked a colleague to join me for drinks that night. That evening, after getting the news about the date from the boss, I went out drinking with my colleagues at a bar. The story of the marriage interview had apparently become office gossip, and my colleagues seemed genuinely interested. I amusingly shared with them how I had a major fight with the president's daughter at the marriage interview. My colleagues jokingly warned me, "You're going to get fired," and I felt a chill thinking it might not be that far-fetched. To shake off that anxiety, I got seriously drunk, which was something I hadn't done in a long time. A junior female colleague was doing her best to support my drunken self as we staggered towards the subway station. I spotted Nora Harris in the crowd. Our eyes locked instantly. Then, expressionlessly, she flashed me the middle finger. In response to her blatant provocation, my drunken head heated up. I was pulled along by my junior female colleague as I wobbled. Even as I was being led, I couldn't take my eyes off Nora. Noticing my gaze, Nora nonchalantly lifted her skirt to flash her pure white panties at me. I was captivated by their whiteness. Just as I heard, "Watch out, you're going to hurt yourself," I crashed into a corner wall. I saw stars as I banged my head on the wall. Ouch. I crumpled over, clutching my throbbing head that I had hit hard. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Nora grinning wickedly. What the hell? I couldn't help but grumble to myself. She could smile after all. However, strangely, I didn't feel angry. I found myself starting to enjoy Nora's audacious personality. The date that I was dreading somehow became something I was looking forward to. On the day of our date, I still had a bandage plastered on my forehead. Despite this, Nora's expression didn't change at all. As soon as we sat down side by side on a park bench, Nora repeated the words she had said during our initial meeting. "Do you actually want to get married?" Hearing the same phrase again, I felt there was a catch to this matchmaking. I thought that she might have a compelling reason to get married. If there's a reason I can help, would you mind sharing it with me honestly? She looked at me, eyes wide with surprise. From my serious expression, she understood I wasn't joking. After a deep breath, she began to speak. This marriage interview, it seems, was something she had requested from her father. Apparently, she wanted to prove herself to him. She had been in a long-term relationship with her first love, but had been betrayed by him and her best friend. Betrayed by her boyfriend and her best friend, the deeply wounded Nora wanted to get married to show them up. She wanted to show them that she didn't need them. That was the reason why she was rushing into this matchmaking. Her story left me a bit flabbergasted, but I also felt sympathy for her. Being betrayed by people she trusted and being left alone suddenly is hard. I am a daughter of a president, so it would be like you're marrying up, right? I'll also treat your parents well. If you want, we can even divorce when it suits you. Her face was dead serious as she desperately tried to persuade me. I guess she's this desperate because she still can't forget her first love. Suddenly, I found myself feeling a strange affection for her. So much for her cool beauty persona. Isn't she just a girl who can't forget her first love? I wouldn't mind going out of my way for her. After hearing her whole story, I found myself thinking like that. All right, I'll do it. Let's get married. At my response, her face lit up. Thank you, she said. A faint smile played on her lips as she held back her tears. The disbalance in her expression was so beautiful that I found myself at a loss for words. It just hit me how sudden moments that capture your heart can be. The talk of marriage moved ahead swiftly. After all, Nora wanted to get married as soon as possible. When I reported my plans to marry to the boss, he was happier than when his own son got married. I want to pay a visit to your parents, she said when I was about to start looking for a wedding venue. Nora said so with a serious face. I hadn't been back to my hometown or my parents' house in a long time. For me, my hometown was a place I had essentially abandoned. Only embarrassing memories remained. I was a little afraid to take her back to such a place. I didn't want to deliberately show her parts of myself that I disliked. But she said it's a necessary step and wouldn't take no for an answer. In a way, she almost forcefully decided on my return home. When we actually got there, I was surprised to find everything looking so familiar. The family home I so disliked returning to now felt incredibly nostalgic. Seeing my parents again after a long time, they had aged more than I imagined and looked noticeably smaller. My mom teared up at the sight of me, and when I introduced Nora as my future wife, she sobbed. She was overwhelmed with joy. My silent dad also seemed happy about my return, albeit in his own quiet way. After the greeting with my parents, I took her to something she had insisted on seeing during our visit. I led her behind the family's barn. There, her eyes lit up, and she exclaimed, "This is amazing." My motorcycle was just left out there next to the barn. Surprisingly, she loves motorcycles and has a license for large ones. She'd heard about me riding a motorcycle in my student days and had asked to see it. It's not a big one, but it's a bike I cherish. She stared at it for a while and then said, "Thank you." After that, I decided to show Nora around the neighborhood. "So this is where you grew up," she said, looking down on the river from the embankment with deep emotion. Compared to the city where she grew up, this must have seemed like a peaceful countryside. Everything might be new to her. After deciding to get married and meeting a few times, Nora's expression gradually softened. She would even flash a small smile at me. If we build a home together, will she smile more? As I thought about creating a warm home, I felt a bit foolish. She's marrying me not because she loves me, I remembered. But I guess it's okay, because I'm in love with her. "Hey, is that you, Robert?" A hoarse voice called out to me, probably from too much drink. Turning around, I saw an old friend from my rebellious days, Steve, looking at me with a surprised expression. On either side of Steve Young, punks still in their prime were standing by. It seems Steve couldn't manage to reform himself after all. "Yes, but who are you again?" I replied. The heat in the room instantly surged. I figured he was a mate from my reckless past, but his features had changed so much I couldn't recognize him. The signs of a rough life were etched onto his face. "You think you can just waltz back here after all this time, acting high and mighty like the old days?" He glared and threatened me, but I wasn't scared in the slightest. My only worry was whether my girlfriend, who was with me, would be in any harm. As we locked eyes, Nora peeked her head out between us. "So it's true, you were a badass," she said, starting to laugh, clutching her stomach. Seeing her laugh so freely, both Steve and I were taken aback, losing momentum. "Who's this you're with?" "She's the woman I'm going to marry." "I see." Just like that, a peaceful expression fell over Steve's face as he looked at Nora. "It seems like your life has been moving on just fine." Hearing that, I remembered clearly who this guy was. The moment I realized, I froze on the spot. He was my ex-girlfriend's brother. I wanted to say something, but the words stuck in my throat, and I couldn't get anything out. While I was frozen in place, he gave Nora a gentle pat on the shoulder and smiled. Be happy with Robert. I had a sister too. She's not in this world anymore, but do it for her sake as well." Leaving those words behind, he started to walk towards his car parked under the Livy. The way he slouched slightly as he walked looked like a testament to the past he was carrying. As I stood there in a daze, Nora took my arm and smiled. "Should we go visit your ex-girlfriend and your buddy?" At her words, I shuddered. I wondered how she knew. My mind spinning, I left my hometown because of a motorcycle accident. I loved motorcycles since my rebellious days, and in my youthful folly, I thought reckless riding was cool. Back then, my girlfriend was a year younger, and she often rode behind me on my motorcycle. The night of the accident, I was at the police station because of a fight I got into during the day, along with my parents and my school teacher. When she heard I was taken to the station, she panicked. She was riding on the back of my boy's bike to come pick me up from the station when the accident happened. It wasn't because they were riding recklessly. The driver of the compact car that hit their motorcycle was an unlicensed high schooler. He was a kid just like us, up to no good, and apparently he fled the scene without even calling an ambulance. When I was finally released from the police station, I remember being punched out of the blue by her brother at the entrance. When I finally saw her and my buddy in the cold morgue, I couldn't even cry. I was left in a state of utter disbelief, emotionless, unable to do anything but gaze at the two of them. Afterward, as soon as I graduated, I left my hometown. I left everything behind, including my home, to start afresh. To my surprise, Nora seemed to know all about this. "My dad would have definitely looked into my potential match," she said with a hint of regret. It made me wonder, knowing all that, why she would agree to this matchmaking. Knowing my past, how did this match even happen? By all accounts, I was a nuisance, wasn't I? Did her father not consider the harm it could do to his daughter? Times change. "My dad understands that, and so do I," she retorted, sounding a bit upset. I scratched my head, realizing the depth of Nora's father's understanding. Perhaps being raised by such a parent is what made Nora as compassionate as she is. When I met her and his best friend for the first time, I visited the graves of my ex-girlfriend and best friend. Nora stood next to me, her hands folded in silent prayer. When I asked her what she'd been talking about, she said, "I was informing them about our marriage." With a chuckle, I declared that I was taking Robert. With a serious face, Nora walked ahead, leaving me stunned. She turned back and reached out to me. I took her hand. We held hands for the first time. Her hand was slightly sweaty, perhaps from the nervousness. Her face was calm as always. When I gently swung our hands, she looked down and gave a small, shy smile. Her shy smile was endearing. I wished she could open up to me sooner, and so we walked hand in hand down the Sunset Road, lost in thought. 6 months after greeting my parents, we were finally on the eve of our wedding. Nora was still a grad student and surprisingly busier than I was with my job. "You're free to do what you want on your last night as a bachelor, you know," Nora told me at the cafe we were meeting at. My coworkers had invited me for drinks, but I wasn't particularly excited about my last bachelor's night. I was a little worried that Nora might get cold feet at the last moment. Nora, unaware of my feelings, seemed slightly upset. I think she feels guilty for pushing me into this marriage. How awful. Nora's face fell as she raised her voice. "Do you know them? It's my ex, Tom." As I turned to the entrance, I saw a man in a suit and a trendy-looking girl entering the cafe. When the man spotted Nora, a distasteful grin spread across his face. He walked straight over to our table. "Long time no see. So you're getting married, huh?" He talked as if we were close, but his eyes weren't smiling. He was a good-looking guy, but there was a hint of danger about him. "Tomorrow is our wedding. It's a small ceremony for my family only. This is Robert. He's going to be my husband," Nora introduced. I gave a slight bow and muttered a quick hi. The man looked down at me as though I was something disgusting. The girl with him looked anxious. So you're being shipped off to a husband so soon? Is this an arranged marriage or just a move to get back at me? Pathetic, despite his provocative words, her expression remained unchanged. She cast her eyes down, seemingly ignoring the man's harsh words. Even if Nora could shrug it off, I couldn't. I glared at the man from my seat. My attitude seemed to make him falter slightly. I don't know where he comes from, but I'm not about to be bested by some man who's probably never thrown a punch in his life. Are you trying to pick a fight with my wife or with me? I don't back down from a fight, you know. What are you going to do? So what if it's an arranged marriage? Nora is the woman I chose. She's too good for you. When I growled back, Tom's face went pale. Layla, who fell in love with Tom, pulled the man's sleeve and said in a low voice, "Stop it. Really? You're going to marry this uncouth man? Don't expect to be happy." Tom spat out a petty parting shot, then hurried out of the cafe as though he was fleeing. Nora watched him go, her face stunned. Then she turned to look at me intently. I felt strangely uncomfortable under her gaze. Unable to endure Nora's scrutiny, I turned away. Ignoring my discomfort, she placed her hands on my cheeks and turned my face towards her. "Do you love me?" She looked deeply into my eyes and quietly asked the question. Caught off guard, I started to panic. My body temperature rose dramatically. At the same time, an irrational anger welled up in me. What a clueless woman! My words slipped out in embarrassed frustration. She frowned and gave my cheek a firm pinch. Ouch. Ouch. Stop it. I just like you. Okay. I never said you had to like me back. The pinching fingers finally released me, but my moment of relief was short-lived as she swiftly slapped both her hands on my cheeks. Why do I have to endure this? I glared at Nora, my eyes watering from the pain in my cheeks. How clueless can you be, you thick-headed man? Surprised by her sudden confession, I pinched my own cheek. I wanted to make sure I wasn't dreaming. My cheek did hurt, and she was standing in front of me looking angry. She seemed to be on the verge of tears. Making the bride cry the day before the wedding was unforgivable. I'm sorry. I apologize. I realized that I was the clueless one. She had been giving me signals all this time, and I had missed them. Nora stood there, her face pouting. Tomorrow, she would be standing next to me in a pure white wedding dress. I was glad I could confirm her feelings the day before our wedding. We might have our fair share of arguments, but we'd be a happy couple indeed. Nora